All right, everybody, the mold is complete. All the parts have been done. It's basically a tank capsule at this point. All I've done at this point is that I came through and I drilled my holes so I can use to bolt the appropriate flanges together. So these holes represent the bottom portion of the tank, so that because there's only two parts, this front section and the rear section, so that bolts those two together. And then the top, we have the flange holes here. I did drill two reference holes in case I ever had to set the two mold halves together. I do have two bolt holes to help for alignment there. I don't ever think I'll ever use them, but I did put them in there, and I put them in a less conspicuous place for when the hole gets laid up. On the center section here, I offset the holes because I put my dowels on both sides in the middle here, so the holes are offset on there. And then for this one, the dowels were like down here, and another one was over here. So I made sure that I marked them in prior to laying up the glass, so I'd know where they were at. So I used a black Sharpie marker and colored in on the gel coat so that that would bleed through when I laid the fiberglass up. Anyways, this is done. So at this point I have to come through, and I use my die grinder with a cutoff disc on it. So pneumatic. If you don't have pneumatic, you can use electric with a cutoff disc. They're the really thin disc, fiberglass reinforced. Don't cut this with anything other than fiberglass reinforced. Or you can use a jigsaw or whichever you may use. I use a die grinder. I usually find I get cleaner cut edges. So anyways, I will try to maximize the amount of flange that I keep on the tank, simply because that basically that's the backbone of the mold. Your flange, that's what helps give the strength to keep the mold from being super flexible in areas. So I'll maximize the flange all the way around on all the parts, including up here. So I assume that the mold's probably going to be about 2.5 inches in height on here. So I'll get this trimmed. We'll come back after I will separate the molds after that, and we'll talk about how I did it, and then we'll see from there. That's it. Hey everybody. All right, the mold portions have been removed from the tank. I took in at a couple little places where the actual paint on the tank actually stuck to the mold a little bit. Didn't damage anything. It cleaned up with little effort. I went ahead and wiped down the tanks with some paint thinner to remove the modeling clay, because it kind of sticks to the mold. So that's all cleaned up, and then I took and washed the molds with some soap and water. As you can see, they look really good. There's no finish, or at this point I haven't done any kind of finish sanding, or so I will probably go around and sand and true up all the edges coming up to the flanges, because this is where the parting line will be generated for the actual part. The center here I generally don't touch much unless there's actually some high sides on it, because this is where the two tank halves come together. Everything else looks good. You can see right there, there's the molded dowel that we put into part, so it gives me a positive lock into the actual mold portion, which was right here, you can see. And then I've already pre-drilled all of my holes. Before I break the mold away from the part, I drill all my bolt holes for simple fact that then they're precisionally marked together. So don't break your parts, your molding part, and before drilling it, or you'll be chasing around unless you got some kind of positive lock like dowels or something. But it's still better to drill it before taking it out. You can see I have about a 2.5 inch upwards to 2 3/4 inch of flange in here. This is the bottom section of the tank, and there's the other section as well as the cap. You can see where I put the nasty looking tape in there. I did have a little bleed through, as you can see right there, but as I noted, this portion of the mold is only to mark when I make my part to know where I need to cut the hole. So I will clean this up dramatically because I'm not worried about it. And then also on some of the screws, there's a light, you know, where it actually leached into the screw threads, just a small portion of it. So I'll take and buff sand those off to clean them up where they're nice and clean. And then, as I noted, that on when you're trying to sand on an internal section of a part, and it's really difficult to get true, etc., once you've made your mold, all those difficult parts will now be easy parts. So you can see I can easily get to this area and sand and true up anything. And where those pockets that were really difficult to sand, you can see I'll be able to sand that much easier. Everything will be perfect at that point. So anything that was, you know, and then there's things that was a negative, I think I pointed, maybe you can see it, I don't know, with the glare. I'll try to move it around. You see there's there was an imperfection in the paint. That'll easily be buffed off. Bear in mind that you don't want to over sand. When your gel coat starts to get translucent in color, it means you've gone, you know, deep enough. If you start to break through the glass, your surface finish will never be able to be perfect, simply because the glass will always show the texture in your part. And then here I have a bolt already screwed in to the actual point. So you can see this is one of the threaded inserts. They are brass and they have like a knurled hook type outer finish. It's meant to grab into a material. So then you'll be able to, you know, thread those on as such. And then I'll most likely put modeling clay over the top of the hole here to keep from getting fiberglass resin leaching down into that, so that would close that hole off. And then I'm able to spray it while it's in position, fiberglass it up, and then voila, I have a metal insert for the threads so you can have a lot more strength. Out of all of, you know, other than having a couple places with the paint stuck, I only had one area that got a chip, and that segment was right here. There's a little chip, so I will have to repair that. Luckily it's in a really easy spot to get to, so that will have to be, so what I'll do is I'll come in with a Dremel and grind a little bit so I have a nice super clean surface and rather rough, and then come in here and patch up the gel coat and then resand it true. A lot of times I'll put the stuff on there and then I'll put tape across it so it'll help reduce the amount of bubble, at least in the bigger areas, so I don't have as much to sand. The other sections is not so bad, so you can usually use tape to put it over the top of the gel coat to kind of level it out a little easier instead of having a big bubble of resin. So anyways, I'm going to put the sections of the molds together so you can see it together, and then after that we're going to wrap up the video. So that's it. All right, here they are. The mold halves are bolted up. The tank will never get laid up with this on top of it, at least to my knowledge at this point. The mold parts, this will be laid up as one piece, this will be laid up as a second piece, and then it will be glued together using the standard flanges like a normal tank would be done. When I go to, there's only two bolts in this mold. There's one in the front and one in the back, and they're finger tight. So you notice my seam line is really, really good. So if your resin is mixed too hot and causes shrinkage, and it causes the mold to bow and pull, and if I only had the two bolts in here, your mold halves would have a gap in here because the mold would distort as soon as you pulled it off of the plug. You don't see it while it's on the plug, but when you take it off the plug, you'll see it. So, and then all of these seams, everything for the primary sanding of the mold, anything that seam areas, I will actually come through and I will sand those areas first so that I can blend the two surfaces together to make sure that there's no issues. At this point I don't feel anything. Everything looks great. Same thing with here, being that I am going to do a lot of sanding on here to try to fix a lot of the issues that I couldn't do really good with the depth of the plug. I will sand a lot of it while it's all together like this, bolted up, so that way I can true up everything and it will look good. Your seams and cracks, you'll never be able to get away from, these kind of cracks. You can use modeling clay again in your mold if you're going to mold the parts. The downfall is that modeling clay is oil based, and if you're going to use just PVA as your mold release agent, the PVA is repelled by it because it's an oil based, so you'll never get PVA to work around it. So if you're going to use a wax base, then the issue is not as big of a deal. Most likely for making this first part off the mold, I will most likely leave this unwaxed. I'll get it all polished up. I'll PVA it, make the first part off of it with using PVA, and then after that, that should hopefully season the mold. And then after that, I will probably only use wax because I don't use PVA that much. I prefer just wax. PVA is really nice for the fact that it's water soluble, comes right off. You don't have to worry about surface prep of your part as much as far as trying to remove wax if you're going to apply paint and such over it. I haven't decided. Really, I'm not set in stone with just using wax, or I may just stick with PVA. I don't know. I prefer the wax because the wax, you can wax it, and once you get the mold good and seasoned, you have to wax it very seldom, and then the parts just keep rolling out. With the PVA, you have the risks of bugs landing in it, or you touch it wrong and it comes loose from your part. So there's a good things and there's bad things with either one of the two. I'm quite comfortable with wax, so that's most likely what I'll use. Anyways, this is what the halves look like. This video series, I'm not going to cover up laying up a part. This is an advanced series of making a complex mold. I will tell you that in this particular instance of this being a fuel tank, it's going to get use vinyl ester resin. I still use a gel coat, but I'll put stickers over the ports, specifically here, with tape. Spray my gel coat, remove the tape, and then lay up vinyl ester resin in the parts. And then once the parts are done and trimmed, they will get blast etched. The interior section of it will get blast etched, and then it will get an ethanol resistant epoxy. And the reason I'm blast etching it is because it gives it a really nice surface to bond to. The blast etch will leave a dull sheen to the whole part. You don't have to worry about missing portions of it because the glass is going to be all lumpy and bumpy and stuff from the strands of the material, so it's just easier to blast etch it. That way I got good coverage of roughing the surface up, and then it will get joined together. Once it gets joined together, then it will get epoxied to seal it. The vinyl ester resin is great for fuel resistance, but I want to use a double barrier insurance here with the vinyl ester resin, and then adding the epoxy to it as well. So anyways, that's it for this video series. If you got questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll do what I can to help you out if you're trying to do a similar project, or if you got, if you want something covered in a video, something like that, let me know. I'll do what I can. Anyways, y'all have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one. See ya.